Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, imagine more than half of your population not being able to read or write. That's Pakistan right now. So what's at the root of this crisis and who's to blame? Can't do a show without our digital producer Malika Bilal looking out for your live feedback. It is late in Pakistan, but the tweets are coming in. What are you seeing?
The time is definitely not stopping them, and so what we are seeing are these conversations happening amongst our community members, something that we love when that happens. And a lot of them seem to be saying, before you look at the root of the problem and talk about the Taliban, you need to look at the government. Sarah here on Twitter says, oh, the education crisis is much deeper. Taliban come nowhere near the top of the crisis list. Of course, we'll get into that during the course of today's show, but we want to hear from you at home as well. So join us with your tweets and your Facebook comments using hashtag AJStream.
And joining us right now here in our studio, we have Shiza Shahid. Shiza is the CEO of the Malala Fund. It's great to have you here in the stream, Shiza.
Thank you.
Do you tweet?
I do. I'm just learning how to tweet. I launched my Twitter account a month ago, so I'm catching up.
People will be following you. Your Twitter handle will be on the screen as we're in our discussion. You'll hear more from Shiza in just a moment. And Twitter is one of the ways that you can keep up with the stream. But have you also checked us out on Facebook as well? It's the perfect place to share your thoughts on upcoming stories. You can pitch ideas, tell us what's making news in your part of the world. But right now, here's some of the stories that you've been following. The story of Malala Yousafzai, a Pakistani girl shot by the Taliban last year because she fought for the right to go to school, has gripped much of the world. Here she is addressing the United Nations back in July.
When we were in Swat, the north of Pakistan, we realized the importance of pens and books when we saw the guns. The wise saying, "The pen is mightier than sword," was true. The extremists were and they are afraid of books and pens. The power of education frightens them.
Much of the Western conversation has been focused on the Taliban's role in the crisis of education in Pakistan. But does the root of the problem lie much deeper? According to UNICEF, 20 million Pakistani children are not in school. Government spending on the education sector is just 2%, with accusations of corruption, lack of policy enforcement, and a widening socio-economic divide. The country is now reportedly dealing with half a population that's illiterate. So who's to blame? And what can be done to fix this problem? Joining us to talk about this on Skype from Karachi, we have Amba Zuberi. She's the director of Teach for Pakistan, a nationwide movement of graduates and young professionals who spend 2 years teaching in under-resourced schools. Joining us in our Google Plus Hangout, we have Tahir Adrabi. He's Professor of Economics at Pomona College, and he's the principal investigator on a 4-year study on the quality of primary education in rural Punjab. And also we have Ahsan Salim, co-founder of Citizens Foundation, one of Pakistan's leading organisations in the field of formal education. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you in the stream. But I want to start with Shiza first of all. If we look at Pakistan's many educational challenges, and we're looking at who's responsible for 20 million kids not being in school, how big a role does the Taliban play in that?
I think the Taliban's role is projected. It's the one that we hear, and for good reason, because it is traumatizing when a school is bombed or a schoolgirl is shot in the head deliberately. I think that's a horrific incident. But I think that reflects a much deeper issue. And the failure of the state to educate its citizens, to provide them adequate security, to make and designate schools as sacred, safe spaces for children, to which all children have a right that must be safeguarded. and also the failure of society to prioritize education and to see its value, whether for structural reasons or because they simply don't see it leading to anything better.
Sure, so you've scooted right past the Taliban issue. So it's not that big a deal and we're just a little obsessed by it outside of Pakistan?
I mean, it's hard to say how big is it a deal if one girl is shot in the head or one school is bombed. It's a huge deal, right? No child should ever have to suffer in that way. So if you look at it as an issue, it is enormous. If you look at it structurally, in the list of issues that plague children, that keep children out of school, in a numbers game, then it's not at the top of the list in the numbers impact, but it is in itself a huge crisis and a moral tragedy.
So, Amba from Teach for Pakistan, are you seeing anything like a Malala effect in your work? Are you seeing people treating your work differently because of this one youngster's story that's traveled the world?
I think, as Shiza said, it is a moral tragedy, and I think most Pakistanis around the world have been shaken up by it. If anything, I think education's become a debate, and specifically within the Western media, education in Pakistan. But in Pakistan, people are going on about their work when it comes to education. As Shiza said, Taliban is just one of the many factors plaguing a broken system. We were talking about corruption at all levels. We're talking about, we talk about no civic or weak civic will. It's the same for the government. And there's a whole myriad of issues facing education, and there's a lot more to be discussed just than the Taliban.
Sure. Malika.
That's something, of course, that's being echoed, as I mentioned at the very top of the show online. Sarah says, sure, the Taliban are a problem in certain parts of the country, but there's also corruption. There's something she calls ghost schools that we'll talk about in just a bit. And she says there's a discrepancy between unequal access to resources, other problems that have been around for far longer. But Ahsan, I want to bring you in here before we move on to some of those problems with talking about Malala. Harish on Twitter says Malala is hype created by Western media, the US and Europe, along with Pakistani elites. It has had no impact on Pakistani education. Why are we seeing sentiments like that? Because this is just one tweet of many from our Pakistani community members who say this has actually had a negative impact.
I don't know why they're saying that. Malala incident is a great tragedy. But the problem, if you look at it put it into context, they are 20 million children out of school. They are not. Why are they out of school? Because there are not enough schools available, and when they are available, there are people who cannot afford to go to school because state is not providing free education to all children as it should. And those who are left out on the street, either they cannot afford to go to school or they just don't have the schools available. And this is a problem which has been there, not for now. We started our work about 18 years ago, and there were no Taliban at that time. And there still was a problem. And in the last 18 years, actually the enrollment rate has gone up from 44 to 54%.
How do you feel how do you feel your organisation has actually contributed to that, Ahsan? What are you actually doing? I want to share that with our international viewers who don't know your work.
See, we started off about 18 years ago, and because we did not want to be part of the problem, we wanted to do something to change things around, just to be able to have a say. We decided to put up 1,000 schools all across the country. We opened our first 5 schools in 1996, and we opened our 910th school this April.
So you've got 90 more schools to go. That is an impressive.
90 more to go.
That is amazing. Let's broaden out the conversation. You guess you're already beginning to do that. We have to think of Pakistan of many provinces and different challenges in different provinces. So let's talk first of all, Takir, about access. How big a deal is that? Just kids physically getting to school, having a school to go to.
So access is an issue, but it has been over the last decade or so becoming less of a problem. The government over the last 15-20 years has constructed a lot of schools, but in our research we do find what we call the distance penalty. The distance of a school to a household that does predict a girl's enrollment and pretty much in all the rural areas.
So what does
Now,
that
as I
mean
said,
then to hear? Like how far would a school be from a child in rural Punjab, for instance? That's an area that you know very well.
Yeah, we have looked at areas other than Punjab too, but we are talking about something like half a kilometer to a kilometer. That starts making a difference in many rural areas. But as I said, now the thing that we have been focusing on over the last 15 years or so has been the rise, a very dramatic rise of what we are calling these low-cost private schools that have emerged all over the country. In fact, Malala herself, I think, went to one of them and her father owned some. This is a phenomenon which now has something like 15 million kids enrolled. These are low-cost schools set up all over the country and very cheap. And so I think that has really changed the rural landscape. And that has moved from a simple definition of access to thinking more about school choice and stuff like that.
So, Tahir, change the rural landscape in a good way? Is that what you're saying?
I think largely yes, in a good way, because what it does is if you start viewing the world in terms of what Pakistani parents and kids are doing and actually what their behavior is, I think that helps us think a lot. So, for example, these schools are financed locally. The teachers are all local women, and their fees are very low. And what we find is with less resources, even than, for example, government school teachers are paid 5 times as much as these teachers. Their kids in our testing are doing considerably better. And we have tested them for also, we have looked at social behavior and outcomes, and that seems a little better.
Okay.
Well, Amber, in this discussion about access versus quality, we're seeing two kinds of minds here online. Miriam writes in, far distances from schools is one of the problems, but then there's a video comment here from another member of our community. Have a listen, Amber.
Well, there's no question that education is the key to Pakistan improving as a society, but just as important as education is what education. There have been many studies that have shown that, in fact, intolerant views are most dominant amongst the educated middle classes. It's really important now that we not just improve for example, increase the budget for education, but the quality of the education, the curriculum of that, so Pakistanis can be part of the 21st century information economy.
So, Amber, he says it's not just education, it's what education they're getting. Can you talk about that quality aspect?
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. The work that we started doing as a co-founder for Teach for Pakistan that is what our intervention is. When we talk about education, we talk about education as a means to expand life opportunities, take Pakistani children and put them in the 21st century, because unfortunately our curriculum and textbooks are completely outdated. So we talk about putting quality graduates in classrooms that need them the most. So take the best of the Pakistanis out there and put them in the most pressing problem, which is education.
So Amber, when you were talking about outdated textbooks, how outdated? Give us an example.
Oh wow, it's incredible. The first time I went through a Sindh-issued government textbook for English, sixth grade textbook, the longest passage was about 5 sentences long. According to the national curriculum of Pakistan, which is not followed or implemented, a 6th grader should be able to write a 3-paragraph essay. There's a huge disconnect.
Ahsan, you're smiling, but you're smiling in not a good way. What's behind that smile?
No, I agree with that.
Right, and then Shiza, you were also nodding when we were playing the video comment about quality of education. What was going on when you were hearing that?
I couldn't agree more. I think, one thing Malala's father said to me when I started off with them on this journey, and I said, how do we help get girls into school? He said, be careful. The 9/11 terrorists were very well educated. A lot of schools are breeding violence, hatred, intolerance, a lack of empathy. So what is being taught? Does it include empathy? Does it talk about moral fiber? Does it include diversity? And does it then empower children to build their lives, to lift themselves out of poverty? That's the core of this.
So as we're talking, you'll bring up lots and lots of different issues, and we actually spoke just yesterday to the Minister of Education, and he's a Minister of Education for a particular province. It's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and we asked him about the priorities and what were his priorities. Just have a listen to what he said.
There are a lot of problems. I mean, there is political interference, the teacher training program is not that good, and a lot of problems, missing facilities, even girls' schools doesn't have toilets and even boundary walls. So we have a lot to do, and our main priority is fixing that broken system because of bad governance. So we have to fix that system, and it's not our priority to make it maybe fundamentalist or maybe liberal. There are so many other problems other than just textbooks and curriculum. So we are focusing on them.
So, excuse the poor audio quality, but our Minister for Education here was saying, Joe, there's so many problems, but I'm just going to focus on fixing a broken system. Hassan, is that another challenge for the government, the federal organisations, to try and get the school system up to a better standard?
See, I think facilities are important because you cannot have poor schools for poor children. You have to have good schools for all children. But the point is that first of all, there are a lot of children out on the streets. We have to take them off the streets and put them into school. That is the first thing. Everything else comes later. Once they're in school, yes, we have to get them to a quality which is an acceptable level of quality so that they can compete with the other children who are children of rich people and who go to elite schools, so that they have a good chance to compete with them.
Are you seeing that happening? Where are you seeing that happening?
I think we are seeing that happening, because the good news is that when we started 18 years ago, the problem in Pakistan was a demand side problem as well as a supply side problem. 18 years later, it is only a supply side problem. It is no longer a demand side problem. So this is a big change. It's a very, very profound change which has happened in the last 18 years.
Sure. Amber?
I can come in if you want.
I'm going to go to Amber and Tahir, we'll hear from you too, and then community as well. Waiting patiently, Malika, thank you.
I couldn't agree more with Hassan. There used to be a demand side problem, but that doesn't exist. The universal fact is, every parent wants to send their child to a school, and a good school is what every child deserves, but a great school is what they need, especially in Pakistan. And when it comes to like fixing a broken system, we talk about infrastructure development, but my question to the government is, what about the quality of education? And that starts with the teacher. What are the recruitment methods of having a teacher placed in a government school? Most of the English teachers, they can't speak English fluently, even if they show up to school. So I think the way the education discourse has evolved in Pakistan, it's very positive, but I'd like to see more focus on quality, specifically when it comes to the role of the teacher, because that's one of the biggest influences. And we've seen that at Teach for Pakistan. Enrollment rates in most of our schools have increased within a year, and this is when we just have 2 to 3 teachers teaching in a school of like 5 grades.
Well, Tahir, I wanted to bring you in here because we heard something that Hassan said a little bit earlier about demand and supply. But something I'm noticing online is people are saying, what crisis? This is some people, mind you. This person, Hassan, on Twitter says, those crises are only in northern tribal areas. They're not in the whole of Pakistan. In 90% of cities, girls go for education freely. Now, we have an infographic on our website at stream.aljazeera.com about Pakistan's education hurdle. And I'm scrolling here to something that I mentioned earlier and promised we'd get back to about ghost schools. Ghost schools, more than 6,000 of them actually are in Sindh province, which is where you see the big cities of like Karachi and Hyderabad. So clearly this isn't just in the rural areas. Can you elaborate on that?
So, I mean, there are lots of things that have been talked about, but let me just point out, pick up on 2 threads. One is that we are converging, right? I mean, in some ways, I think both Hassan and Amber, I think that quality is a really big issue. I mean, I think the first generation battle was access of getting people into school. I think in reality, if you look at the numbers, as Hassan pointed out earlier, the growth rates of enrollment for girls in rural areas and poor areas in Pakistan, actually, I'm talking about the growth rates, not the levels, have been very high. The median girl in Pakistan is in school. This is the first generation where we'll have more girls in school. It's increasing pretty much all over the country. Now, the key issue is once they come in schools, what are they learning? When we have tested kids and all, we have found in actually the poorer rural schools, the quality of learning is really, really high. And my sense is that what we have to focus is, first of all, quality is really low in the sense that
Yeah.
an average third grade kid is at the first grade level of learning. Now, I would tend to side more with Amber than Hassan on this, which is I think that the role of the teacher is really important. I mean, and I think that's one way to segue into the government schools. The idea of go schools is where the teacher is not present. It's not that the infrastructure is not present.
So the teachers literally don't turn to here. Let me just make sure this is right, because for the rest of us, where we go to regular schools and the teacher turns up every day, it's an unusual phenomenon. So the teacher physically doesn't go to school.
Yeah, I think that's at the heart of the governance problem of the government sector. I mean, one difference between these very poor private schools and the government is that somebody's making sure that the teacher turns up. And I think that the reality is that the government system is dysfunctional in that. So I really would focus. I mean, while I think it's important to think about what is being taught, but a lot of these kids are at such low levels that we are really talking about the basic R's here, right? I mean, you want to get them up to that level, and in government schools, the governance of the teacher in terms of absenteeism and in terms of their commitment to teaching, I think is really low. And I think if you want to think about reform of the government sector, that's where we want to go. In other places, we want to think about learning in various ways too.
I want to share something with our audience that we found on Twitter, and it's from the Alif Ailan campaign, which is basically to get this education crisis and attack the education crisis full on in Pakistan. And they did a prediction for when every Pakistani child will be in school. So they looked at Punjab, Sindh, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan, these various different provinces. Look at their predictions: 2041 for Punjab, 2049 for Sindh, and then we go to the worst prediction, 80 years to get all the kids in this province into school. I just want to go around, I guess, just very briefly to get a sense of the optimism that you're feeling, or maybe there are more challenges than optimism. Let's start with Shiza.
I think it's a hard question, right? And for me,
it's a hard challenge.
It's a hard challenge.
Yep.
It's hard to project. For me, what gives me the most insight in my work is to put myself in the shoes of the most vulnerable child, right? And what does that child have to suffer to go to school, and what does it mean for that child to go to school? And so if that child is in domestic labor, you can have a great school, but they're not going to go.
So I'm going to push you. 80 years before a kid in Balochistan gets into school. Are you optimistic or not?
I think these forecasts, they're based on assumptions, and I'm optimistic, and I think what Malala inspired so radically, so fundamentally in the world, the fact that she survived a bullet, all of those things make me optimistic about education in general. So I would say, not 80 years.
Okay. Phew. We started with Malala. We're coming to the end of the main show with Malala, but there's so much more to talk about. You have tweets lined up. What is that one there on your laptop?
Well, I have one that we'll share it. It's a teaser for the post show.
Okay, go ahead.
How much awareness has the Malala Foundation brought about education in Pakistan? And of course, we can save that answer for the post show.
Okay, so Amber, Hassan, Tahir, I haven't forgotten you. I know that you've got a lot more to help us out with in terms of Pakistan's education crisis, and where do we go to next and how do we address it? So, just time to tell you about Monday's program. We'll be talking about the Democratic Republic of Congo. Has the long-running conflict that's claimed more than 5 million lives there finally come to an end? Government troops are celebrating beating rebel forces. But what's next for the DRC? We'll find that out on Monday. What's next for you? Well, if you go to stream.aljazeera.com, you will see us in the post show. We'll see you online. Thanks for watching. Hello again, this is the Streams online post show. We're carrying on our look at the root of Pakistan's education crisis. Helping us to do that, we have Shiza Shahid, CEO of the Malala Fund, Umber Zaberi is director at Teach for Pakistan, Asan Salim, co-founder of the Citizens Foundation, and Tahir Andrabi, he's professor at Pomona College. So it's great to have all of your expertise. I'm feeling the brain power working right now. Do you know, when people complain about education, it doesn't matter whether you're in Pakistan, whether you're in the UK, whether you're in the US, it's always the teachers. It's the teachers. So let me bring in Umber here for a moment. You talked about the teachers a little bit. How could the teachers be better for the kids? How could we serve the kids better in Pakistan? One, maybe just going to school in the first place, perhaps. What else?
That's a great question, and it's something that we think about a lot at Teach for Pakistan, because the bulk of our work is taking the best and brightest of Pakistani students across universities and placing them in under-resourced schools. When we talk about teacher recruitment, we need to be focusing on what do we want for our students? What teacher actions do we need for our students to bring themselves out of poverty and increase their life opportunities? What will that take? And I think Shiza touched upon values. I think that's a huge part of the education. It's more of a holistic approach than anything. There is literacy and numeracy, but there's also, you have to understand, these children don't have a household level investment factor as high as most kids do from middle and high income. So the teacher can play that role and needs to play that role.
I just want Assam for you to just paint a picture for us again, because the levels of poverty in Pakistan are so immense that sometimes as a family you have to decide, do you send your kid out to work or would you send them to school? And when you have so little, that's a tough choice. Can you help us actually understand, how do you beat that horrible cycle? Because if the kids went to school, then they might be able to actually fend for themselves a lot better and bring more wealth into their communities.
See, this was true maybe 20 years ago or so, but today every parents want to send their children to school, number one, and the community also compromises. You know, people do go to work, they go to work after school, and those who employ them, they do make that adjustment. And we have numerous cases like this, because we have 126,000 children in school, and we get stories every day that the community actually cooperates when the child wants to go to school as well as work. And we feel that they should do both because of the economic circumstances, because there is no trade-off in this. And the only trade-off is that they can do both, and it's a win-win situation for them.
Umber?
I just want to add, I completely agree with Ahsan. I think the situation has drastically changed in Pakistan. It's a universal truth. Parents want to send their children to school. So granted, the Citizens Foundation has been around a lot longer, but at Teach for Pakistan, we have a lot of anecdotal evidence that proves we have kids coming to school with no textbooks, no shoes, no uniforms, and mothers will say that we can afford to feed our child once a day, but we will send them to school because there's a teacher present in the classroom. Enrollment rates have increased dramatically when there are teachers present in the classroom.
You know, Tahir,
I think on this
Tahir,
issue
if I could though, I'd like to get your thoughts on what our previous two guests just said. We heard Umber say and we heard Ahsan say that things have changed, and maybe it was true that kids were working 20 years ago, but now parents want their children to be educated. Our community says, yes, that's true, but poverty still ranks very high. Online, on Twitter, Sana says kids are still forced to work, provide, assist as a result of being in poverty. And there's a video comment, Tahir, I'd like you to have listened to along the same lines.
At the root of the problem, the biggest obstacle to universal education in Pakistan is a powerful, educated elite that benefits from the sustained illiteracy of the people that serve it. Pakistan has achieved tremendous growth in some areas, which makes you think that if the elites wanted to fix education, they would have.
So you hear her say, as our guest said, that things have changed, but there's some skepticism there.
No, so listen, I mean, I think what you see from the data and large-scale data and in many different aspects of what's happening in Pakistan is that where people can make a difference in their life without directly confronting existing social norms or directly confronting authority, they are doing so. Schools are opening right, left, and center in Pakistan. Women are becoming teachers more and more. It's the largest profession. This year, Pakistan is now having more female medical students than males, more doctors. There's certain professions where things are opening up. There is space for people to act in Pakistan. I think the elite question is real. I mean, I think that the issue of the elite is really scared of letting people take charge of their own destiny, of taking charge of their own schools. But I think there is sufficient room in Pakistan for people to operate, and we are seeing it in so many different ways. I want to quickly add on the child labor issue. The real issue is not child labor for work. One thing that we are finding in our very detailed household surveys is the real issue is housework for girls. I mean, girls is a very interesting issue because most of them don't work outside. And I think that the issue of women and education and their household work, I think that's really where the debate on this issue should really go, not so much on the classical notion of child labor. What we are seeing is women are getting more educated. I would end with a very positive note. Pakistan is on the cusp of something very dramatic, which is that the number of educated girls is, you can see the glass half empty or half full, is larger than it has ever been in its history. And we are seeing more and more of these educated girls becoming mothers, entering the labor force. And I think it will have a very dramatic transformative effect. I think that your graphic is very misleading. That's a wrong way to put it. I think what you should show is every year how many girls, percentage of 18-year-olds who are being educated. And if you show that over the last 15 years, you'll see a very steady improvement.
So
not to say they're not issues.
To hear your glass is half full, right? For education in
I
Pakistan.
would say it's about 60% full.
Wow, okay, that's optimism. We're going in the right direction. I like that. There was something that actually shocked us as a team as we're putting this show together, and I found an article, Shiza, on the Friday Times, and it was called Textbooks and Tolerance. And I'm just going to read you a little quote from it. It's on my laptop here. It says, "Our books refer to Hindus as enemies, and that's very embarrassing for me." And this is said by a Hindu student called Narendra Lakwani. What is Narendra talking about here, about what's turning up in the textbooks once kids are getting to school?
There is an issue of what's being taught to children in school, and there is the reality is that there is a lack of diversity in the curriculum. Islamiyat, so Islamic studies are taught as opposed to religious studies. The way that the history of the country is portrayed, many would argue is not an objective portrayal. I wouldn't classify myself as an expert in the curriculum, but having gone through the system, this is something that I noticed.
Can you give us
growing up.
Can you give us an example? Because obviously, if we're outside and we don't know the history of Pakistan, it would be nice if you could actually give us an example. Maybe Amber, you can jump in here if you've seen more specific textbook examples.
Well, one example was earlier on in schools, students were taught religious studies more broadly, and then during the government of the military dictator Zia-ul-Haq, that was changed to Islamic studies. And I'm sure Amber can actually give more specific examples of the sorts of things that are being taught in schools that are worrying.
I'm sure Ehsan will actually be able to share more detail.
I like the way we're sharing this one question with the whole guest team. Nicely done. I think that's called passing the buck. Ehsan?
No, but I will say this. I agree with Shiza. So not in terms of Islamic studies, but more social studies or the history of Pakistan. It's a very biased perspective, especially when it comes to the partition of India and Pakistan. And going through those textbooks almost makes you want to cringe that this is what we're teaching the population. Like, we're talking about public school systems. So that's about 60% of students going to school enter most of them go through the public stream. And it's embarrassing.
And Ehsan, since we're passing the buck, our community is cringing. We asked our community members from Pakistan what their school systems were like, and Nadia says her books were outdated and most of the time gave only partial information and biased historical perspectives.
I think textbooks is a major issue, and it's not only religious studies or history or whatever. Even languages are totally out of context. They don't take care of the environment which the child is growing in. And at TCF, we have taken a huge sort of project on, which is developing our own textbooks so that, the context and as well as the quality of the textbooks is good. So the learning outcomes actually depend on what you put in the textbooks. And
I'll take a contrarian point of view here a little bit, okay? I mean, most of your tweets are coming from people who are educated. Listen, if you want to focus on the poorest segments of the population, if that's your concern, because you have to understand the diversity of Pakistan. If you look at the poorest segments of the population, most of the kids, when we test, cannot read these textbooks. So it doesn't matter what's written in them. What you have to really make sure, I think this debate is a little bit misguided. I think
I said that in our editorial meeting.
Literacy, right? So my sense is, let's focus on getting kids to read. I think once we get kids to read, then we figure out, what is it that they're reading in terms of biases and all that. Right now, our problems are very serious in terms of getting kids up to even the 3rd grade level. Most kids can't even read up to that level.
I just want to add to that. Tahir talked about sort of the achievement gap that he's seen. Again, ours is purely based on Karachi and Lahore schools, but on average, our students are about 4.5 years behind where they need to be. So a 6th grade student is at a 1st grade level. That means he reads, writes at a 1st grade level. We have 7th graders who do not know their entire English or Urdu alphabet. So that's what ground reality is.
So Tahir, I have to tell you this, we have a little editorial meeting before we come onto the show, and I suggested that I think the kids should just go to school and learn to read and write. What was the reaction, Malika?
Everyone had a different thought.
Yeah, some pushback from my own team. I know that Tahir, your glass is 60% full. Shiza, you gave us a more optimistic view than Alif Island did, which is the campaign to really put pressure on Pakistan's education system to be better. Umber, so I'm looking at this graphic again, giving me 80 years before some kids in Pakistan get to school. What is your take on that, just as your closing thought?
I think it's a challenge, but I think it's doable. I agree with what Dara said earlier. The tide is turning. Education needs to be at the forefront of all discussions, especially when it comes to the government, especially when it comes to policymakers. And when we talk about the elite, elite need to get involved and demand a better education for the majority of the population.
Right.
So I think it's difficult to predict 80 years or not, but I think the tide's turning.
Assam, what's your long-term forecast?
See, this is a horrific picture, and it is true if it's business as usual. But I don't think it will be business as usual, because if it is like this, then at least, I mean, you guys will see in the next century, but Tahir and I will not be there.
Yeah, I'm going to be dead. I'll not be doing that show.
But I think this can change, but it needs political will as well as participation from actually those who have to receive this education. They have to actually take charge of this. And added with political will, I think this will happen. And as you see, this slide shows that in those provinces where, especially Punjab and KPK, the position is slightly better, because there is the degree of political will is more than in the other provinces.
Okay, so I'm going to wrap this conversation up reluctantly, because I'm enjoying listening to all of your takes and picking your brain for this really important issue. Hassan Salim, the co-founder of Citizens Foundation, thank you so much. Tahir Andrabi is Professor of Economics at Pomona College. He was our contrarian. We appreciated your take. Umber Zuberi, Director of Teach for Pakistan. Great to hear from you too. And Shiza Shahid, CEO of Malala Fund. She's not Malala, but we enjoyed having you regardless. What is the community saying?
I'm going to wrap up with 2 tweets actually that are outside of Pakistan, because this is a global audience. Ermayas says, Mother Teresa from nearby India has said, educate a girl and you educate a community. And of course that theme runs through the next tweet from Hussein, who says, an African proverb, when you educate girls, you educate the whole society.
Now, moving on. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, community. On Monday, we will be talking about the Democratic Republic of Congo. Has the long-running conflict that's claimed more than 5 million lives there finally come to an end? Government troops are celebrating beating rebel forces. But what's next for the DRC? We will find out on the next AJ stream. But right now, we'll always be online. Thanks so much for watching. Take care.